I think we can start. Good morning, everyone. It's great to see you here this morning, and I'm really honored to welcome you to today's panel on harnessing community science for climate action. So let me tell you a little bit about myself and how I've come to really respecting and valuing the role of the community in co-production and in co-design of challenging problems and questions to research. So I'm not a scientist, let me start with that. I am a lawyer by training, and I've spent my career in Washington, D.C., where at one point in my career I had the honor of leading human resources policies and programs for the government's 2.2 million civil servants. I was privileged to have that be a cabinet-ranked position during President Clinton's administration. So being that close to people doing the everyday work of the federal government, serving American citizens, but really citizens of the globe everywhere on this planet, it really showed me the critical role of community engagement and how much stronger solutions can be when they're created with local needs in mind and co-created with community member input and voices. So today we're going to be diving into community science, a rapidly growing approach that connects scientific research and experience to local needs, empowering communities to play an active role in developing solutions. So at AGU, where I work, we are particularly proud of our Thriving Earth Exchange initiative, which really has been a cornerstone and a great model of our commitment to community science. Thriving Earth brings together scientists, community members, and partner organizations to work collaboratively on projects addressing local challenges, such as natural hazards, resource management, and climate resilience. And by training scientists to manage and guide these projects, and we train them in communication with the average person, we train them in how they can best be effective in talking with local policymakers who may not have a scientific background or who may not have an understanding of the problems that are being addressed. We believe the Thriving Earth Exchange can support communities in defining the questions that they need to tackle, in collecting data, and ultimately in using scientific insights for real-world impact. Now, over the last decade, Thriving Earth has launched nearly 300 projects worldwide, reaching and serving over 60 million people. Through these projects, we've seen firsthand how community science can build healthier, more resilient, and more just futures for everyone involved. And we've learned that community science is about more than just gathering data and getting information and spitting it back out. It's about building connections. It's about fostering trust and co-creating solutions that are meaningful to the communities involved. So we are fortunate to have a wonderful panel today to share their insights and incredible experiences with you. Each of our panelists brings a unique perspective on how community science is helping to address climate challenges on the ground in real life, where they impact communities, families, children, the elderly, and people of all ages and in all walks of life. So I'm thrilled to introduce our distinguished panelists. Unfortunately, we have one who has yet to arrive. Hopefully she'll be here soon, but just in case, we will go ahead without her because we want to stay on schedule, and we know all of you have a next event to go to. So we want to try to stick with our schedule. If she gets here, we'll certainly include her in the conversation. So Dr. Tomohiro Oda is our first panelist. He is the senior scientist with the university's Space Research Association, and he's co-chair of the GEM initiative, and he'll tell us more about that in the Q&A session. Dr. Virginia Tallens is Executive Director of the Climate Change Network for Community-Based Initiatives, abbreviated, if those of you who love acronyms, CCNCI, always important to keep track of those. And unfortunately, well, fortunately for her maybe, but I just want to let you all know that Virginia does have to leave a little bit early. She has another commitment. So at some point she may slip out, but we are grateful for her contributions in the meantime. And Julie Arrighi, Director of Programs of the Red Crescent Climate Center. I want to thank you all for being here with us today. And what I would like to do is maybe sit here and join all of you as we tackle some of these issues. And I think maybe there'll be time at the end for audience questions. So please think about where you might want to interact with our panelists going forward. So, Tomo, you've done groundbreaking work in emissions modeling and climate data. We know this because AGU is fortunate enough to be a partner in one of Tomo's projects. You bring a unique perspective on the role of technology in community science. That can sometimes be a barrier or a hurdle for community members to really wrap their arms around and understand. So can you tell us a little bit about the GEM project and how you think some of these emerging technologies, such as AI, can make in supporting community science and the involvement of community members in trying to solve some of our big problems?
Thank you, Janice. Hi, everyone. I'm Tomo. I work in USLA. I'm doing the greenhouse gas remote sensing, the collecting data, actually. That's what I'm doing before. Then now I'm a co-chair in the GEM initiative, Global Environmental Measurement Monitoring Initiative, which is a great partnership between the American Geophysical Union. Also, this time I'm representing Optical Society America. It's a global society of optics and photonics. And what is the relation between two things? That those physicist people are actually creating the technology to doing remote sensing and the environment sensing. Then we have one using the technology and the data being collected. The question is why we're not working together, right? Then in the planetary science, our sciences, we are using those useful data sets. So this is a great collaboration between the AGU and Optical Society of America. It's a global society, by the way. So that's how we started this project. Particularly community science. So let's take an example of remote sensing. We take lots of data sets. It's a global coverage. You can get the data everywhere. Then people tell you, if you want data for your city, you can just click on it. Maybe yes. But is it really telling you the information you want? That's my question. And there may be a gap between data set. For example, as a scientist, we know that there's a data gaps. They sometimes can't see some of the areas, and same thing we can say the same thing for the different technique as well. Then it comes to community science, especially talking about AI. This is tricky. They are quick, then amazing, maybe smart, they millions times smarter than me. It's scary. But here, we have special role in community science, and also the scientists like us. The AI might give you some solution. Hey, this is the answer. You can put in ChatGPT if you want to. They give you the answer. But how do you know that's your answer to use? Then that's where we can come in and help. So it's amazing that now, probably previously, we need to come in to say, oh, this is the data set we created. This is how to use it. Please use this data set. We have to come in a lot to the conversation in the community science, but you can actually directly access to the data set or maybe the information directly. That's kind of new thing. So our role is becoming like a little like a guidance, more friends. I have a great example, by the way. This morning I was talking to my student, and the AI is like, it's like your parent to me. The parents give you, hey, you should do this. when I was small. Why? We don't know that's the answer to it. Now, after 20 years, yeah, you might be right. It's gonna take a while a little bit. And it's like more like becoming like friends over you. Then you might ask a friend, hey, my parents told me like this. Can you believe that? That kind of conversation we can have in the community science. So using those technology plus our special expertise, we can help community people to providing tailored solutions. So it's kind of new time. AI is really our friend. And also they're helping us a lot to do. Well,
Toma, let me follow up a little if you don't mind. Can you give us some specific examples of how technology and data really have helped in creating a or multiple community-based solutions that might have led to climate action outcomes?
I have a great example in the UK, University of Strathclyde, by the way. This is still Glasgow. They're actually taking the local sensor in the city. They're working on air quality, water quality, many local issues. Then again, kind of back to my point earlier, there's a satellite data or other sensing data set, but that's actually not really helping them. Why? Because they have specific policy to implement. So there's always a gap between policy you want to implement, then science data we can provide. But we can just making the alignment better, then you can actually directly respond to the question. And that team is fantastic. By the way, it's partially funded by the Equally Europe. Thank you so much. It's really a team of interdisciplinary team, not just physical scientists, life scientists, social scientists, economists, everyone in there. That's like a beauty of co-creation of information, the solution. So they are providing also most importantly, they're working with city council people. So making better alignment between actual policy and also science. Then they're making the progress on their solution.
Thank you so much, Tomo. And I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Saharmaz Ms. Mirzaza.
I'm not a doctor.
How do you do?
Haven't received
well, I
a
gave you a promotion.
Thank you.
Well, that's okay.
I'll take it.
Okay. We're so happy to have you, and we're going to put you to work right away if you
For
don't
sure.
mind. Okay, even though you were a little bit late. So you have such an extensive, you and the organization have such an extensive background in climate policy, community engagement. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on the following question. A lot of discussion here this week and last week, feels like we've been here forever, about how subnational governments can effectively integrate community science into their climate action plans to ensure both scientific rigor and community engagement. Do you have any examples that might shed some light on this for the audience?
For sure. First of all, very nice to meet you. I apologize for being late. I had another engagement that took longer than I expected. My name is Saharnaz Mirzazad. I'm Executive Director of ICLEI USA, part of larger ICLEI network. I am based in Sacramento, California, and I would love to bring an example from where I live. Before being the Executive Director of ICLEI USA, I was working for the Governor of California, and I wanted to mention a process that could be useful for other nations and subnationals as an example. California is the only state in the United States that has its own assessment. So we have fifth assessment, and California follows the suit, providing its own assessments of the state, which makes a lot of sense because the United States is a really large country. We have a lot of different diversity in geography and population that provides the reason for developing the assessment for the state, which follows the national assessment. This latest assessment which I oversaw for the state, was kind of unique in so many ways. We definitely knew that the role of a community is very important in the science that we develop and the usefulness of science for people who are the beneficiary and the people who are actually using that. As a result of that, when we were developing this, we required the researchers that will be working on this assessment to partner with the community members, nonprofits, and CBOs on the ground to ensure that inclusion and the diversity of the perspectives on the ground. One of the very interesting outcome of this whole process was we divided the state to different regions, like based on mainly their geographic differences. And we noticed that how different their perception of the climate issues and what are their experiences on the ground differs from one region to another. And what they want to focus on is different because for a region that is mainly focused on agriculture, the water is really bold when it comes to that. Or extreme heat events because they have labor on the ground working on the farms. This is very important thing that they wanted to further look into that. And along those lines, now I work for ICLEI, and we are representing local governments. And as an entity that uses this science, they also want to have something that's actionable, that resonates with people on the ground, that they have the data points that they need to have actionable items, infrastructure that will be developed based on that knowledge, and something that the community could understand. One final thought is, in the California process, we, for the first time, we had a section about the indigenous knowledge as a part of the report, we had an advisory board of the tribal members that helped with developing that knowledge and review, and it's like data gathering and data dissemination and privacy of the data and all of that, which was a huge step forward for us in California. And we were very proud of that process, and I really hope that the other states in the United States who follow the suit of developing their state assessment will do the same.
Thank you very much for that. That's a strong start. Thank you. And we're really glad that you're here to share that story, because I think it is a real example of the power, the strength of the subnational entities across the world, not just in the United States. So I'm going to turn to Virginia before we lose her. You have such incredible experience in community-based initiatives, and I know your experience will bring a valuable lens to our discussion. Can you tell us what community science means to you, and if possible, provide an example of a community science initiative you or a colleague have been involved with and the impact it's had?
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Virginia from the Philippines. And for me, I've been in the community for almost 30 years now. I am a community doctor, and we have worked on several projects in the community. For me, community science is a dynamic practice for survival and adaptation of communities based on their history, based on the knowledge from their ancestors. And this is tested by time and experience. It is documented in memory and passed on to generations. It's actually a dynamic practice, and we do this all the time in the community. But we call it a form of a science because it varies from place to place, and it develops through time. And an example of my experience in a community science is very recent only. I would give you a story about a community in Bulacan. It is a province at the Manila Bay, along the Manila Bay. And there was this project threatening the livelihood and abodes of these communities. It is the 2,500 hectare reclamation project of the Bulacan Aerotropolis project. It is a project funded by the Dutch company, Boskalis, and the local business giant, the San Miguel Corporation. What the community did was they tried to consolidate this community science by doing an environmental impact study. And they were able to do this in partnership with our organizations, the Center for Environmental Concerns, the CCNCI, and Agham Science for the People. And what came out of this environmental impact study was that this particular project will endanger the biodiversity and livelihood of more than 2,000 families along the Bulacan coastal areas. We were able to interview and hold household surveys. We were able to determine the importance of the bay in terms of livelihood, how it feeds the children, how it provides money for children to go to school, how it is developed throughout the years, and specifically this area is also a mangrove area. It is also an estuary where it's very rich in different fish and crabs and the livelihood of so many people. And it is also a refueling station for migratory birds. And so the people were able to consolidate their own community-based and community science-based environmental impact analysis, which proves that the project will totally erase all of this biodiversity and endanger their livelihoods, and future of their children. This study was presented as a main argument against the implementation of this project. However, this community science-based project was rejected. And so right now, the project is ongoing in spite of all the efforts that the community did. And so many were already demolished, their communities were already demolished, and they were transferred to areas where they could no longer fish. And this is a very sad story. However, we still continue to push back because we feel that projects like this should consider community science as the basis for any project that will really affect the environment and the people living on the environment. So that's my short story. I hope I was able to provide some
Well, you certainly
article
did,
here.
although I think we all feel a certain amount of sadness and remorse for the outcome. Let me ask you, was the project modified in any way, or did they just reject out of hand the work that you did?
It was totally rejected. And until now, there are the people who tried to stop the project are being harassed and red tagged. Would you know that term, red tagging? And it still remain to be a problem for us because we still uphold the result of the community environmental impact assessment. And however, it's an ongoing project right now, and we also see other similar projects being targeted for the entire of Manila Bay and in other provinces in the Philippines. So it is really a nationwide campaign to protect biodiversity and the people living on the sea. Thank you.
Well, I think we can all applaud you for your courage and your steadfastness in maintaining your faith in that process. And certainly, I think your fellow panelists here, I'm going to volunteer all of us to pitch in and help if there's anything that we can do to support you and the process you're engaging in the Philippines. We're very sorry about how it turned out, but admire you greatly. So thank you, Virginia, for that example. Let's turn to Julie. Julie Arrighi, your work with the Red Cross, Red Crescent Climate Center really puts you right in the middle of climate resilience and vulnerable communities. You stand at the intersection, you're dealing with preparing people for disasters, dealing with the actual disaster, and then certainly the aftermath. How does your organization utilize community science to really improve disaster preparedness and response when you can identify a vulnerable community?
Yeah, thank you so much. So I have a couple of examples with me, and I'll highlight one. But before doing that, I want to just give like a 2-sentence background about the Red Cross to put it into context. So the Red Cross Red Crescent is a global network, and you may not be aware of this, but it's in 191 countries. So probably everyone here has a national Red Cross or Red Crescent society. And importantly for this context, across those 191 countries, there are over 190,000 local offices. And so this is important in the context of also community work in community science, because we're really at that very, very local level, and the folks who are in our network, our volunteers who are living in their communities, they're your neighbors. And so when we engage them in our work, we're really not only reaching at a first order, but then when they reach out to those who also live nearby, it's a second order level of citizen science. The project I wanted to highlight is one of my favorites, not only for what it achieved, but it's also a great acronym as an aside. It's the FRACTAL project, which stands for the Future Resilience of African Cities and Lands. And so this is a project that was in Southern Africa. It wrapped up a couple of years ago. And it's focused on the long-term couple of decade future for urban contexts. The continent of Africa is one of the most rapidly urbanizing continents in the world. And so this is really looking at what are those future risks that are coming from climate change combined with future urban growth, and how can we inform that. And in this case, using a research with citizen science together approach. And so what this project did is it brought together stakeholders, so academics from research universities, municipal authorities, local government, representatives from communities, people living in informal areas, youth groups, et cetera, into something called learning labs. And so these learning labs were iterative processes. There were a number of them held over the course of the project, where folks who were living in the municipality, in this case, let's say Lusaka is the example, were informing researchers about what their priorities should be. So it kind of flipped the version. It wasn't a researcher saying, here's the research, how can we use this? It was really, here are what are all of the issues that we're facing on the day-to-day. Now, as researchers, can you answer this question? And if you can't, maybe this version of the question or that version of the question, et cetera. And so the topics of focus were not predefined. So in the case of Lusaka, the group decided through this learning lab approach to focus on water, and water from a few different dimensions, because as we all know, water is a system, and then it's also a system sitting within the city system. So they had groups that were focusing on water access, for example, reaching into the informal areas, as well as water quality, which is another important dimension, and also flooding in informal areas, because these as a system impact each other. And so after looking at these independently as different groups, they also brought this together into more of a systems perspective. And again, this is the researchers and the folks who are living in these areas, et cetera. And basically, they then co-shaped and developed research agendas, created things like climate storylines, what are the possible futures for the city, and that was able then as an input to be used to inform urban planning priorities for the city. And like I said, this wrapped up just a couple of years ago, so I think the impacts we'll see over the longer term. But I really think this is such a wonderful example of citizens informing science, and science leading into policy that will hopefully lead into operational impacts in the future.
That's great, Julie. Thank you so much for that great example. I think all of you have heard a range of ways to tackle this, and I think that's part of the attraction, the effectiveness of community science. There are a number of ways to get at it and make sure that the community's voice is part of the solutions that we're trying to develop. Let me check in with the audience. Do you all have any questions at this point? You've got the rock stars of community science here, and I'm sure that they could give you great advice if you're interested, or if you have any questions for them about what you've heard so far.
Hi, my name is Zoe, and I'm from Indiana University. I'm here studying mangrove restoration, and a lot of the issues with mangrove restoration projects are that local communities are not being listened to. So what are some ways that we can change that?
Actually, that is one of our problems now in the Philippines because mangroves are not appreciated in a manner that they should be given relevance, especially for climate change mitigation and also adaptation. In our country, we do not have specific legislation for that. And I think policy proposals and other ordinances, local ordinances may be passed. That's what we're trying to do also in the community with engagements with local government officials who may pass resolutions or ordinances to protect the mangroves and also to encourage mangrove reforestation, especially in communities affected by storm surges and fishing communities relying on fishing as their main source of livelihood. Okay?
I can say how the Red Cross approaches it. And this would be beyond mangroves as well. When we are engaging in community projects or projects in general, we start with an inclusive approach by design. So what that means is, for example, in a lot of our city work, and this would apply outside of cities as well, building stakeholder consultation processes and even coalitions. So if I take a different project that's ongoing right now that includes coastal areas, in those cities, and this is also small towns, it's not just like big cities, we have a local Red Cross office, and actually the municipal government is a counterpart co-chairing a local coalition. And then in that coalition, you invite all the key stakeholders. So it would be the local university, the mangrove restoration expert, the community representatives, and in community representatives, not like one big homogenous group, but really what are the differentiated groups that have a stake and a voice or don't have a voice that need to have a voice, and bringing them into that process. And then facilitating the conversations that need to happen around the future trajectory of where you're trying to go. And that means also being adaptable and shaping and co-shaping to sort of walk towards that goal. It's a longer process, but it's a process that fosters much stronger buy-in and ownership across the stakeholders that are around the table. And so this is our go-to approach and default approach when we're trying to have these kind of longer-term impacts that you're referring to, like our key with mangrove restoration.
So I'm a scientist, and typically this is not a solution, but I'm trying to tell myself always, and always we focus on the scientific significance. Oh, this is important for science, climate. But I always asking, what is the value for them? Always. Then societal value, cultural value. If they're not realizing the value, maybe there is some education or the training might be useful. But always telling us it's not scientific significance. Might not be their benefit at all. So.
I will take it from the policy perspective more. I think it really depends on the country and how their systems of policymaking processes have been set up. And in my opinion, many of these things actually are the things that could and should be elevated in the local planning processes. For communities that have climate action plan, I think the role of the community-based organizations and the ones that have capacity, like stakeholders' capacity, will be very important to be the voice of the community. In general, the community members, they're busy with their daily jobs, they have probably hourly jobs and all of those things that makes it challenging for them to engage in a process of a planning. But that's where a CBO can help to be their voice and make sure that the intervention happens in the right time. And just as a reminder, in general, the policymaking, it has a framework, it has a timeline, and it's hard for an ordinary person to keep track of that. And sometimes when they realize that what they need to do is probably aftermath of what happened, or when things has already been decided on. So kind of like that provides more sheds light on the importance of community-based organizations. And I think for that fact, the role of philanthropy in this whole process, because in many cases, these community-based organizations depend on the philanthropic dollars to be able to do this type of work. So I really encourage philanthropy to know that they are the source of support for communities and helping them to stand up and be part of the process when needed.
Thank you all very much. Any other questions from the audience at this point? Okay, well, I can pick it up with some questions that I have here for this great panel. So, what would you advise as the next steps to get this more accepted, a more people to recognize that this is a very legitimate process for tackling and solving big problems by bringing science together with community voices? Thinking big, what do you all think should happen to make this reality? Anyone? Tom? There we go. We've got two. We might as well take advantage
So
of both.
at GEM initiative, it's a global initiative. We have so many GEM center, about 10 right now, we are sharing the information and also the knowledge there. Then obviously, like I mentioned earlier, sometimes you have the global sort of applicable solution, but that might not be good enough to do this. But it's kind of showing the how we can co-create by making a network. Take an example, for example, the air quality measurement, then you can take the same measurement everywhere basically, but each government have different severeness of their pollution, for example, then you have to see different policy as well. Then again, the others is doing this, then they are doing this, then you can learn a lot. I think that's kind of what we can do as a GEM, as a demonstration, how we can actually globally tackling local issues. So that's something we are trying to achieve at GEM initiative.
Since we are at COP, I think COP29 should make this work with financing, with real solutions, especially in communities that are devastated by these climate disasters. As we speak, we have had 6 typhoons in a matter of 4 weeks, and our communities are now suffering. And I think that we should really band together to get this financing to reach the people. Otherwise, we'll just be talking about this and nothing is happening, while we have so many available technology now that should really reach the people so that they can make use of this information, this scientific knowledge. It will only be of service if the people themselves are able to use it. And since I've been here for only 3 days and I don't seem to see any progress in the talks in terms of financing these community initiatives, I hope the people here in this room would listen and accept that it has to be a people's movement in order that we can achieve all our goals. And COP29 may fail, and I think it is already, but we are here, we are the people, we represent people, and we know that initiatives and real solutions will have to push back and achieve climate justice for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Did you want to comment? Yes.
Couple of things. I will be a little bit of more of stepping back, looking into a bigger picture of how community science could be supported in a bigger, way. One is I want to applaud American Geophysicists Unions for their work in this area. For a very long time, many of people in our academic world, they were not clear how they could actually address the needs of people who use the science. And they our academic systems have been set up in a way that you have to work on something new science, pushing boundaries, and then you have citation and all the incentives that is for the academic community. And I think in many ways, American Geophysicists Union, Thrive Earth Exchange kind of flipped that. They encouraged the scientific community to be engaged with real problems on the ground. And it may seem very simple on the surface, but when you dig in, you figure out actually there are real scientific work that needs to be done there to address the needs of the community. And I think that was a really bold movement, and I really think that was a very effective movement. The other area is From the policy standpoint, I think there should be requirements for any academic research or anything like that, that you should have the community voice in your process. This, like, unless you're like doing a lab work, it shouldn't happen in the like silo and without like a meaningful engagement with the community, with people on the ground, because that information may actually change your perspective of the issue and how issue is being felt and how you are like, where do you really need to focus your lenses and your intellectual, time on. I think that's the other part of it. And then finally is everything that happens in this space requires a catalyst. And I'm really looking forward to see who are these in this space that wanted to be the catalyst in changing this narrative and like saying this is the way that it could work better and let's prove the concept and say like this is how the science community is moving and like this is the new way. And I think the climate urgency in many ways pushing us in that direction. And I am hoping that there will be governments or funders that will step up to support that process.
Yeah, I have some thoughts here as well. So I think of both the advice on that like small like community level, one of those 190,000 local offices perspective, and then also on the like bigger system level. So on that smaller level, geographically smaller is what I mean. It's, if we take that example of the Learning Lab approaches, it's reaching out to diverse stakeholders, including the ones that maybe aren't so obvious, but have a perspective to bring that's a complement to what you're trying to achieve. It's identifying the shared sort of burning question across those stakeholders that everyone's in that room and they want to tackle it. Like when I talk about the Red Cross building coalitions, we're not a political entity. I'm not talking about lobby and advocacy there. I'm talking about a group of people that share a problem, that really want to solve the problem, and everybody in that room is needed to figure out how to solve that problem. So identifying what that question is and how to really advance it from that perspective, I think is really key at that local level, and you can achieve incredible results. We've had projects that have taken that approach that have started with 2 partners and in a year have had 20 partners that are each bringing their piece, their perspective, and are advancing topics. And these are across different subject matters, even outside of climate as well. And then on the bigger scale, I think it's also looking for other institutions that are doing this work that are examples that can make your case. And so with that in mind, I want to give a very brief example of a group that's doing some of this work, and the Red Cross is not involved in it at all. I just think it's really cool work and they deserve some airtime. But I think it's also an example of looking for those leaders. And so this one is particularly NOAA in the US. So it's a US government-led initiative under something called the National Integrated Heat Health Information System. Summarize that down, they care about extreme temperatures. And so they have had a project going on now for 7 years running, where they're working with citizen scientists in community after community, over 80 communities now, mostly in the US, but some internationally, to go during the heat season and map temperatures around the community, the town, the city, et cetera. And this is creating incredible information sets about extreme heat risk that's really also building on this citizen science approach of helping people understand how to collect this information. It's not an assessment process in like, we're gonna go and interview you and take your information and leave. It's really an engagement process of gathering this. And then all of that information becomes available so that people can build on it, whether it's from a planning perspective or from a neighborhood consideration perspective, or other researchers that can come back, do research, also engage community members. So again, Red Cross isn't part of that. I just think it's an incredible example of what you can achieve if you make that long-term commitment and you do it at scale. And so a little bit of airtime for them too.
That's great. Thank you so much. Oh, Virginia, we're going to say goodbye to Virginia. Could we give her a round of applause and thank her? Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm sure all of you have encountered some resistance at some point to this process, this procedure, this way of doing things. Do you have any strategies for overcoming that? Whether it was actually the local government, another NGO, even community leaders who perhaps wanted to hold their power and not share it with others or the private sector? Do you have any hints, strategies on how to work around that, work through those issues? Tomo, thank you.
Oh yeah. So typically if you're working in the scientists or trying to get a funding for federal institution or public, but are trying to make a partnership between the private sector, of course. Especially if you think about the global system, government funding, some researches. Then one of the challenges I'm hearing from my colleague here in the community science is that it's a research project. So a couple of years, you identify the issues, then tackle them, then try to solve it. Then you might get to the point, oh, this is a solution. But sadly, sometimes that project might end. Like Virginia saying, so sometimes support is difficult. So I think what we're trying to do at GEM is trying to find out actual value in the community, then including not just government or research academics, but also the local private sector to make economically viable. We haven't had a great example yet, but we're trying to have conversation with people, especially at optical. There's so many industry members who have the local, the private companies. Then they have local knowledge and expertise. This is a combination. We're trying to reach them, then trying to have conversation. So that's what's happening right now at GEM.
That's great. That's very helpful. Any other thoughts? Julie?
I think it's similar in the sense of conversations, right? So I feel like there have been two types of examples of resistance. One would be on the political side. So, for example, with some areas, if you're trying to look at adaptation in an informal settlement, there can be a lot of politics there. At least from our side of the Red Cross, though, because we're in all of these local offices and we've been there for many decades, if not a century or more, we are usually able to, when we find that resistance, have a one-on-one conversation, explain what we're trying to achieve, that it's really about shared goals. We're really not trying to get into the politics of it. And sometimes that'll be one meeting, sometimes it'll be many meetings over a few months. Like, it's just, being gently and kindly persistent. And usually we can break through and have those, progress after that. And I think also actually in that fractal project is a different type of resistance. We, in the early days of that project, had some researchers that weren't totally bought into the idea. They really they had their research and they really wanted to share it with everybody, which wasn't the goal of the project. And that also was like the conversation and, let's come along, let's give it a try, let's hear what folks are really interested in, and then maybe we'll get new ideas for new research. And so understanding what people's motivations are that are really mutually beneficial to everyone can help.
So Hermas, did you have any thoughts on this? Great.
Sure.
I can't imagine that you've met any resistance, but still.
I think both of my friends here really covered it well, but there are a couple of things that when you asked the question, came to my mind. One is that educating people and both policymakers in local level and other levels about the downside of not having community engaged in their whatever they're doing. And when we are talking about research, we're talking a little bit of a larger context of that, because we have scientific communities as not only academics, but they also engage in as a consultant or anything in that sort, but they might do a research. So I think kind of highlighting the potential outcome of that and some failures of that could help them understand why they need to engage community from offset of the project. One of the things that I remember in a personal level was we were working with a coastal community that bluff erosion was a huge issue, and this is a community that is a very wealthy community, and when we presented the research outcome to the city staff, they were freaking out. They were freaking out what the community reaction will be. They were freaking out what would be the impact on the base of their city budget, which was dependent on the properties on the bluff. And also like generally political backlash against like, no, we'll just go and build like whatever seawall, which wasn't really would help in that case. So in retrospective, one of the things that we thought later that it could have been much better if we had like started from a different point and like talking to the property owners and like, have you seen any issues with your property? Do you think that, and then starting from that point would have helped us to build that trust from the beginning and help them to walk with us through that research and like evaluation process versus doing all of that and coming at the end like, this is what we found out, your properties are basically falling from the bluff, and they were like, I don't believe what you're saying. So that's like probably a lessons learned that I think could help in future, like to build more trust and interest in the research process.
Make that step one, right? Absolutely, that's great. I'm going to check in with the audience again. Are there any other final questions? There's one in the back.
No worries. Hi, yeah. So I'm curious on your, I guess I'm curious on your thoughts on this because I've noticed that there's quite a few barriers to try and build and sustain community-based projects, and one area that I've thought about it in is like access to technology and who can financially support this technology and produce it so that it's sustained and available. And I'm curious on your thoughts and if you've had insights as to kind of how to make this better in our communities.
Thoughts, anyone?
I have an example of this, if you'll allow me, that it's not climate change.
That's okay.
So a really, really cool project that the Red Cross once did, I think it's probably like literally my favorite project in my entire career, was something called an emerging technology project, where basically it started with a series of consultations around the world, 6 different communities, like in completely different countries, talking about the types of emerging tech at the time. This was like 7 or 8 years ago. And also their number one pressing challenges. And then that process was to identify a place where the Red Cross would bring together communities and technology companies to try and co-develop a solution for their challenge. So this particular example is from Mukuru in Nairobi, which is an informal settlement. And the challenge that was prioritized was fire risk, which was basically, they were like, fires are just like disrupting us all the time. When they break out, it goes from one house to the next, and then the whole large area. And nobody's really helping with this. In that setting, you have very small houses, and so your traditional smoke detectors don't work because if you're cooking inside or whatever, they'll set them off really quickly. So this was basically, with this challenge as set as the priority, we then convened a social enterprise in South Africa that had started working on this topic. We convened Slum Dwellers International. There were like 24 partners after 8 months of this in this coalition approach. There was technology companies from the US. We got a human-centered design company called Frog, which they're known for helping Apple design one of its first models of computers. All of these groups together to think about this problem. And basically helped to increase the profile of the social enterprise that had just started creating these heat detectors that would detect like a rapid rise in heat, which is a way that you can also detect fire in a small area. And they're networked to each other. So if it breaks out in one house, the neighboring houses will also get warned that they need to evacuate. And then if you get a whole bunch of them in a neighborhood going off, it will warn the whole settlement that you need to evacuate. And so my point here is, again, the getting all of these actors from all sorts of disciplines together to talk about this. And in this case, it was grounded in this social enterprise they were already growing a little bit in South Africa, and with a little bit of the help from the human-centered design company, as well as like a ton of their own knowledge and passion for this topic, they're working all around the world now, and it has created this like long-term sustained effort to try and tackle fire risks in informal settlements. So one of my absolute favorite projects ever. But I think the principles that we've been talking about here are really apply, even though that's not technically a climate change issue, given the nature of how those fires happen.
That's great. Thank you. That's a great example.
Can I say a little bit?
Oh, of course.
Yeah, so this is not about the community science, but let me think about how academics like us contribute to this kind of the local, creating local value. And this is a great example in climate mitigation and remote sensing work, now methane. And we've been developing, we have actually developed the technology to measure methane CO2 from space. Then it was like 15 years ago. Then the company picked up the technology. They are making them, actually their instruments, then flying over it. And we never thought about it before when we started science. But I think for us, it's great. I think coming to your point earlier, not just doing the research, but what is actually the application to the society. So maybe we can think that way, not just publishing result or sharing data. This is useful. How? Then what is the value to this community? I think that's kind of thing we can provide as a help. It doesn't solve everything, of course, but as academics, specifically working on some techniques, probably that's something we can contribute. But we need all, like you mentioned.
Yeah, such a great question, and it kind of like made me to dig into my like old knowledge base of like what would be the great example. And my examples are not directly also climate related, but it's related to how you can also sustain like a technology in a community. And I totally agree with both of you that it should relate to what is the value added for the community. I think one of the good examples that I remember was related to air monitoring. We have like air quality issue in many of major regions, and it has been always a challenge to how to do you accurately monitor the air in a way that it could be meaningful. Because if you are in a region that is like on a continuous basis, like in a larger like area, have air quality issue, how does this play in a like a localized area? We didn't have those type of data in the past. And air districts provided funding to put monitors in neighborhoods and all of those. And like, I think one of the successes of that program was like they got the partnership with different local stakeholders that would be part of this process. So this monitoring can be sustained in long term, like with a school, with a CBO, and then a local community college, that they can be part of like this whole monitoring process and support system. Most of them were deployed in the areas like low-income disadvantaged communities that could benefit from that, because you can't like close the school for multiple days, but is this really the day that you want? It's like really depends on local monitoring. I think that was a really interesting process to be able to sustain something, and like because you have the community buy-in, the need is really clear, and that support is there to keep the project going. One other example that this is a very recent example of research technology. I've worked with one of the NASA labs in California on air mobility, and it's like this was very distant idea for me, and I'm like very like I don't know, it looks like a movie, action movie. It's like, are we talking about air mobility? What is that? And all of it, like, and interestingly enough, California is home for some of the biggest companies working in this area. And even like involvement of NASA in this whole thing was very interesting. Why are you interested in this topic? And the ask from NASA to us was like, we don't want to go forward with another technology or supporting this type of things without knowing that it would add value to our communities, especially the communities that are on the front line and they will like potentially left behind. And when we engage with some of these community, it turned out that there's a huge need for something like that, especially in the agriculture community that have a crop that needs to be transported quickly. And if this could be a solution for them, that they can like transport their crop in a more efficient way and less expensive, which this technology could provide, that would be a very added value. And then it could bring the buy-in from the policymaker, from the community, to have like a regulated air space that can be used for that. So that's another example of a technology adaptation that could be used in the climate area as well.
Thank you all so much. Great examples. I'm going to take a little bit of privilege here, do one more minute. Just real quickly, what's the one piece of advice you'd give someone who's thinking about this, who thinks this is a viable way to solve big problems, but who's just getting started? Who's going to go first? You're holding the mic. Oh,
My apologies. I'm like, so are you talking about the scientific community or like?
people in this audience who are thinking,
I
who
think
want to get started
yeah.
on this path.
I think definitely look into your academic community as a wealth of knowledge that are willing to support. I haven't, in my entire life, never happened that I reach out to a scientist in a university, it doesn't matter where it is, and they don't reply because they always are excited to help and support. And they might not have the resources, but at least they are willing to help you think about it, which I really appreciate. And how we can kind of like get their help and also help them to solve the issues that matter for the community is kind of important. So if you are in a space that you can do that, I'll definitely encourage you to think about it.
So ask your family to friends, then, if they're not interested in your research, then think about why. That's the value. My parents not really understand what I'm doing, so I need to talk more, but that's the value. That's actually what means to them. That's really the question you keep asking. Then if you're not doing that, do just hard work for your study, then I think community science myself, it took a while to understand the value of community science. Doing my research, then complete publication, then next step, I'm not making impact to society. That's a start point. So just do what you were doing now, then focus on it, enjoy it, then talk to many people.
That's great. Julie?
I think building on this, refining your pitch. The person that you're reaching out to that you want to join, there's a problem they're trying to solve too. Understand what it is, reframe what you're trying to do that helps them also solve their problem. And then just go for it because it's possible. And the people who say yes are the ones that you want to work with because they're the ones that are excited about it. And then you can build momentum from there.
That's terrific advice from all three of our panelists. Please join me in thanking them and thank you all for being here for this session.